with is a security services manager for the AME group located here in Nashville. Jay's got about 15 years experience helping companies implement, he calls it the ever-changing requirements of DoD contracting. And I think anybody in that space understands that. Also providing IT services for healthcare and banking and helping businesses achieve compliance to PCI and SOC 2 requirements. Jay is also a CMMC AV registered practitioner and holds Microsoft 365 Identity and Services and CompTIA security certification. So Jay is going to talk to us today about some of the common cyber threats that companies should be aware of and some things that you can do to help protect your companies from them. So Jay, take it away, sir.
Oh, thank you, Misty. This is more of a discussional presentation. I've got some information to share with you, and look forward to a dialogue and guiding you through whatever your questions may be, and helping you get yourselves prepared for implementing good security, measuring your security, and really keeping the staff engaged and making them a part of things. So I'm glad to be here this morning, and let's get rolling. A couple of stats that I do want to show you. I know that this is dated 2018. It's 4 years ago. Stuff changes quick, but I want to show it to you in comparison to a more recent one, so we can see the trend. 2018, we're an IT provider, so I'm referencing data that is applicable from our standpoint. But 79% of IT providers reported their customers having ransomware attacks. This is going back a few years. They were really prevalent. They were coming all over the place in a variety of methods. Phishing emails was one of the primary attack vectors. Somebody click a link, download something before they knew it, and they were off and running, getting their data encrypted, and wasn't a very good and satisfying day for that individual. End user training was identified several years ago as a key requirement to improving your security posture. It has been proven time and time again that we as people, as human beings, are the weakest link in the security posture. The attackers play on our emotions, our egos, our desire to do what we're asked and help people, and we're just built that way, right? So they take advantage of those things and really create a lot of havoc within an organization if we're not aware and trained and able to protect ourselves in the environment. So just a couple of things there. Going to 2020, a few other pieces that developed out of it were the length of time it actually takes to detect a breach. So if you don't have security monitoring in place, then a potential breach can go undetected for months and months. You'll finally find it because somebody will say, this was provided to me and it's wrong, or I found this in an email attached to something from another customer, or things of that nature. It just gets discovered through the course of normal business, and that's not a good thing if that happens. So really having security monitoring services in place will allow you to detect those breaches, if not immediately, within a very short period of time. 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses. That's actually gone up now to over 60%. The smaller businesses have just as much valuable information, or the information they have is just as valuable. It's just not as much. So a few more attacks at a smaller organization is much easier to accomplish than one attack at a very large organization that has very deep pockets, very mature security. So that's the shift in that has been to the smaller organizations. Used to people say, well, we're so small, nobody's going to worry about us. That's not true at all anymore. The fact that you are smaller makes you a prime target. You can see the number of attacks by phishing email have increased to 91%, and it still holds around there, 91, 93, 89, a little variance, but that's still the primary method of attack. Again, take advantage of our human nature. We're kind-hearted people. We want to help that prince get here, and they're going to take advantage of those things. So that's really the key, one of the key areas. and then being able to determine, if somebody was a victim of a phishing email, what's going on and what could potentially be at risk. Business falls victim to ransomware every 14 seconds. That's actually a little lower now. Ransomware attacks are on the decline. The impact of them is greater than what it used to be, but the actual number of ransomware attacks is a little less. One of the things that's changed in the ransomware environment was they used to just encrypt your files, ask for their payment, and then give you an option to decrypt them. Now what they're doing is they're encrypting your files, and then they're taking them. So they're exfiltrating your data, and then they have your data. They can decrypt it because they own the keys, and then they can sell your data. So now they're asking for even more money to prevent from doing that. But because they're getting bigger payouts, the number of actual attacks has gone down. Not significantly, but it has gone down. Malicious email attachments was really big let's go just a few months, up until just a few months ago. One of the things that helped reduce that is Microsoft, one of the big players in their Office 365 online services, implemented a new control within the Office 365 environment that automatically disables macros in their documents from running. You have to manually choose to do it. And that alone, huge impact on the ability to spread malware through attachments, really greatly reduced it. Not everybody uses Microsoft, but a large portion of us do, and that made a significant dent in that method of attack. It's still out there. There are services that can't manage the Office file types itself, or you could get an executable file as an attachment, things of that nature. So there's still plenty of risk there, but Microsoft took a big leap at putting a dent in it. And then companies faced an average of 22 security breaches that's per company in 2020. And that number is expected to increase. So the security breach doesn't mean you had data that was stolen or lost. It just means whatever your security posture was defeated in some manner for an instant or a point in time. And we're seeing this, all the time. We see it. In some of the services we monitor, we will see connections from foreign countries. So you have to go in and eliminate those. Those would be considered a security breach, not necessarily a data breach or privacy breach, but security. So you'll see these numbers continue to go up as the attacks become more and more automated. There's less human intervention behind the attacks anymore. They're done through programmatic methods, scripts, and so on. And all they do is just broadcast these attacks till they get a victim, and then manual intervention takes over. So as these probes, if you'll call it that, are being conducted, the number of breaches that'll be discovered will continue to rise. And then the global cost of online crime is expected to reach 6 trillion. I saw a number by 2021. I saw a number the other day that said it was already at 9 trillion. I should have grabbed that. Could have used it for this presentation. But the cost of it's just astronomical. And part of what's driving the cost of cybercrime are the penalties that businesses are paying or incurring, the cost to repair the damage that businesses are incurring, not just paying out these ransoms. There's a lot of other factors that go into the cost. The legal services you need, the insurance services you need. I mean, all those things are factored into the overall cost, and it's just going to continue to go up. So you can see that it's not a rosy picture, put it that way. It's just going to continue to become more and more of a threat to us, and we just need to take precautions to stop them. And there are plenty of precautions you can take. So we'll get into some of those. But today we're going to talk about a few key topics that are actually really prevalent in today's threat landscape. Email account compromise or account takeover, protecting the perimeter, and then logging and auditing. These are a couple of really key elements that, if addressed properly, can go a long way to reducing the possibilities of a breach in your environment, of data loss and business disruption, right? We want to prevent that. So, and then at the end, we've got some resources available, and I'll kind of walk you through them. I have two in particular that are my faves. If I had an internet BFF, they'd be these, and I'll kind of walk you through those and the benefits of using those resources online. So, cybersecurity in itself is really just, the protection of our networks, our devices, the data, the critical assets in your environment, anything, network connected. Excuse me, I got something in my eyeball. Anything connected to your network that can control systems, maintain data, you name it, it's there. It needs to be addressed. It's pretty broad, to help get through a proper security implementation. You want to start focusing with some smaller items, maybe a particular system or a particular service, and work your way through securing that, move to a different one, and address it in smaller pieces. It makes it easier to handle from a budget standpoint, from a manpower standpoint, and as well as from a just understanding. You're not overwhelmed with how many options you have. So a good avenue there. Some of the risks with not having a good security posture. Obviously, we talked about ransomware. Ransomware can also damage equipment, depending on what the author, I'll call them, the attacker, is intending to do. Some of them, their intention is just to wreak havoc, cause damage, and the programming that's being used by the ransomware executables will run in cycles and purpose to overheat processing units, over-exercise memory units, so that they're exceeding the capacity of its read and write, so actually can damage the chips. Obviously, read and write activity of the hard drives. You can, easily destroy a hard drive through activities based on the program. So there's just the damage alone. The loss of the data, as far as it being corrupted, deleted, whatever the case may be. If anybody's like me, it takes me 2 hours to compose a thoughtful email, because I'm rewording, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And if those files get deleted, that's an awful lot of work that has to be redone, if it can even be redone. Sometimes it can't be, and that's a significant problem. There was a stat, and it's not been touted around too much lately, but over 50% of businesses, small businesses, mind you, that suffer a cyber incident, either a ransomware where they can't recover their data, but a data loss. If any of the suffering a data loss like that, over 50% of them go out of business within 2 years. And that's because the cost involved in trying to restore that stuff is just continues to rise. And then the effort and some of the data you cannot get back. You cannot recover it. It was created, it was unique, and it's gone. So those are real and true threats to the organization and the staff and the employees. And then what can we do to improve it? The very first thing you have to do is understand what the risks are. It doesn't. There's practical things, right? We all lock our doors. We all use maybe a home alarm systems, things of that nature. Same thing goes for business. You lock things up, you store them safely. But then beyond that, beyond those basics, what's really at risk? What's the potential for something to happen to it? What's the impact if something does happen to it? And understanding that helps you prioritize, where do you put your resources? None of us have enough resources to do everything all at once. It'd be great, but we don't. So again, when we talk about where do we start, there's some basics. We start with the basics to protect the organization. But then when we get into the specifics, we need to know what are those risks related to that, so we can prioritize which one do we start with, how much are we going to spend, when are we going to have it done by, and flow that through the rest of the systems to make sure we're covering everything. It's a logical process. There are tools, and when we get to the resources, the available resources to help you with this, there's some things there to help guide it. And it's really just a logical approach. It's just step back. Let's look at things in small pieces and see where it takes us. So one of the good tools that I like to use and reference is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It is a open framework provided by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, available for everyone's use. It is not a standard unto itself. It's not a compliance requirement. It's not security requirements. It is a framework of best practices that you can implement in your organization. And then you can pick pieces out of this framework that are applicable or not applicable and create your own security posture that you will plan, implement, and measure over time. And again, these things take time. You're not going to sit down in a day and say, yep, this is what we're doing. Here's our plan for it. I mean, it takes months just to plan. But the sooner you start, the sooner you're making progress, the sooner things are being implemented, and the sooner you're protected. This framework is very applicable to any industry. There are customizations of it for military, for water treatment plants, for healthcare, finance. There's a bunch of them that have been modified, and I'll get you to where you can find that information here in a little bit. But you don't have to start from scratch. And it's also so widely used and so well known that it is being mapped to other standards. So HIPAA requirements will have a mapping to the NIST CSF. FFIC, banking, finance, will have mappings to NIST CSF. The CMMC has mappings to NIST CSF. So it's very applicable and very easy to use, and it's gained a really big acceptance. So it's a good place to start, and then from there you can deviate to specific requirements as you need to. But if you meet some of the NIST cybersecurity framework elements, you're already halfway through your specific requirement by the time you get started on it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise a hand or put them in chat. And if it's topical to where we're at, just please let me know what it is, and we'll address them as we go through it.
Thanks, Jay. I actually do have a couple of questions.
Oh, absolutely.
So I will feed them to you here.
Yeah.
The first one was, do most small companies that are attacked with ransomware end up having to pay to get their files back?
Well, if it's a yes or a maybe question, right? If they don't have a way to recover their own data, then yeah, they've paid. If we have, or if that company has a good backup that's recent that we can recover from, then no, they don't pay. Insurance companies with the cyber liability insurance, that's one of the benefits of having your cyber liability insurance, is that they'll actually pay that ransom if necessary. But I'll come back to cyber. There's a whole nother piece to cyber insurance, but yeah. So if you have a good backup, you don't need to pay. You can go ahead and restore from backup. Now, the other caveat to that, Felicia, is with the newer approach to ransomware, where they're actually stealing your data too. If you pay the ransom, they say they'll delete your data and give you evidence that they deleted it. So if you don't pay that ransom, then they're going to keep that data and either sell it or do other things. So
Cybersecurity is amazing, isn't it? The next one on the docket is, what does a company have to do to regain security after a ransomware attack?
So that will depend on how the ransomware got into the environment. So first you need to, we need to get the data restored and recover those systems so we can operate. B, you have to find where the ransomware come from. What initiated it? Was it on, this computer, that computer? Once we get that, we can remove it from that element. Then you have to determine, well, how did it get to that computer? What happened that allowed that to even run? And you just start working backwards. And that's where the investigation comes in. That's why having logging data is so important, because if you don't have the data to capture those events as they've occurred, you won't be able to determine how it happened, and you thereby won't be able to determine how to best protect yourself from it happening again. So you recover the data first, while that's happening, because that typically takes a good amount of time, you're investigating where did this come from, removing it from the environment or isolating it somehow, and then going through the discovery to figure out how did it happen so we can prevent it.
Okay, thank you. That is, that's very helpful. The next question I have is how much of the 9 trillion is contributed to attacks in the manufacturing industry?
So initially that number was low. Manufacturing was not a real target until the past 2 years to 18 months. Now manufacturing has become one of the primary targets. The reasons for it are twofold. Historically, their security has been weaker, and the value of compromising what's called operational technology, the systems and components used to produce, not your computer systems where we're typing emails, but your technology and computer systems tied to your manufacturing. The value of compromising those, stopping those, or damaging them has been recognized. So attacks against manufacturers are on the rise, and of that 9 trillion, that number was significantly small for manufacturers previously, but it's only going to go up from here. And
that makes sense.
I'll just add a quick little story to it, and I'll make it quick. I subscribe to alerts that CISA provides around vulnerability announcements. So when a vulnerability is discovered in a program, a device, a service, or whatever, it's reported, and then CISA aggregates all those and they'll send out a notice. I get 10 times the number of vulnerability announcements for industrial control systems and manufacturing equipment as I do over normal information technology equipment. So it's just well known that, hey, this stuff is vulnerable. We can make a buck. We're going to go do it, because that's primarily the attacker's motives are financial. There are others that are ideological, and that's where the shutting down utilities and things like that come into play. But for the most part, it's financial.
Whew. Yeah, they're learning, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
The next one is how long does it typically take a small to medium-sized business to recover from an attack?
That'll depend on how well prepared you are for an attack. It all starts with your preparations. Say, for example, in your personal life or in your business life, you've got plans for a natural disaster. We know what's going to happen if we are looking at flood damage or possible tornado warnings. We know how we're going to respond to those emergencies, right? I've got my emergency kit in the car or in the garage. We throw it in the car, we can run. I know that I've got to call, these providers if something happens. And so I'm prepared for some of those instances. The same thing goes for the security incidents. If you're prepared for the potential or the possible scenarios, you've already figured out your plans on how you're going to respond, who needs to be involved, who needs to be contacted, and that will significantly reduce your time to recover. If you haven't prepared, then you're coming up with all those plans on the fly. What do we have to do? Everybody's sitting down trying to figure out what do we have to do next. You do the first step, you do the second step, you do the third step, you realize, shoot, the fourth step really should have been first. Now we're going back and doing it again. We just lost 4 hours. So it's around that preparedness that will reduce your time. Incident response, as seen on this graphic, is a key element to that. Your incident response planning, your disaster recovery planning, having those things work through with the team to understand what do we do if this happens. That way you'll be prepared and ready to react when it does.
Thank you. That is very helpful. I think that's all the questions for right now. So we're listening.
Very good. Well, hit me up as they come up. What I'm showing you here on this graphic are some controls around cybersecurity. We call them controls. They're points that either check something, prevent something, or at least audit something that's happening. And so we have the data at a future point. And these are just some. This is by no means all the security controls available. in the IT realm, but it's just a place to start and get people thinking and have a conversation. It is in the context of the NIST cybersecurity framework. On the bottom left, we have identify, detect, or protect and detect, which are 5 or 3 of the 5 functions. On the far right, we have respond and recover, which are the 2 more, the other 2 functions of NIST CSF. In the middle is a piece that's really not a major component of CSF, but it's a practice that you need to have, which is called governance. All our controls on the left, email protection, content filtering, intrusion prevention, the product itself, a next-gen firewall, vulnerability scanning. You have to know where your risks are. That's a big part of it. DNS filtering, intrusion detection. I mean, I'm not going to go through them all. Those all supply input for those 3 functions. Being able to recover systems quickly, respond to threats quickly is all part of the respond and recover process, not only quickly, but successfully. It's great to be able to respond quickly, but if I can't successfully remediate anything, that's not a great help. But in the center here, your information, right? This is your data. And everything we're doing, or your assets, let's call it that. Everything we're doing on the left and the right, above and below, is to support securing that information, to make sure that we maintain confidentiality, that we have data integrity, it hasn't been modified, changed, adapted in some form, and that it's always available when we need it. It doesn't mean it's always available 24/7. It means it's available when we need it. It could be during business hours, could be at whatever point. And those are the measurements that we put in place. So something for you to kind of burn into your retina here for a little bit. I wanted to leave it up for a good while so you could absorb it and kind of look at it. But the governance and compliance pieces that are in the center are really how you manage it. How do you manage your security? How do you manage your risk? How do you stay current in the threat environment so that you can achieve the right protections? And that's a big part of it. There are not a lot of controls available for that. It's a lot of work. You're planning, you're establishing policies, procedures, and those are the parts that will really drive your organization as you start to move through the process. So the impact of cybersecurity, everybody talks about how great it's going to be to have all this stuff protected, but we forget that as we put these things in place, we're going to affect the culture. We're going to change the way things are done in our company. We have to. It's not, we can't avoid it. We need to do these things. But as we're implementing and designing our solutions and trying to figure out what we want to use and how we want to do it, you need to keep in mind that it's going to be a change. And now people are going to be resistant to that change. It's human nature again, right? We don't like change, especially when it affects our daily lives. So if I'm going to get up and walk and go get a cup of coffee, that's great. But if I have to get up and go through a metal detector and get frisked and go through an ozone system or something, I'm going to quit drinking coffee. So you got to keep those things in mind as you're doing this. If they're required, they're required. But how do we make it easier on people and process to adapt to it, to understand it, and then to participate in it? One of the ways we do it is through our policies and procedures. The policies of your organization, especially specific to IT security, cybersecurity, they're going to set the rules that you're going to operate by. And everybody needs to know the rules. Everybody needs to understand the policies, why the policy exists, what we're trying to protect, who's responsible for that policy, so they can get questions answered if they need it, so they can recommend changes if they need them. We need to know the rules of the game. Sit down to play a game of cards with friends. If it's a game I haven't played before, they got to show me the rules. I need to know what I'm supposed to do. Training is probably one of the biggest things you can do to impact the culture. It's one of the easiest, and its effectiveness is in a couple of areas. One, you're actually training people on proper practices, things to look for, new threats, and increasing their awareness in general around security, not just some of the specifics, but some of the more broader general discussions, similar to what we're doing today. But a frequent training system, program, plan keeps security top of mind with employees, engages them in that conversation, and has them play a more active role in participating in the security. So security doesn't just happen, we make it happen. We're the ones implementing the controls. We're the ones watching for things, looking for a stranger walking down the hall, looking for a USB thumb drive on the floor that we know shouldn't be there, looking for sensitive data that's left on a desk. Those are things that we all participate in and have to provide those security services. So the frequent training just goes to setting the mindset, keeping people engaged. It's fun. I mean, you have a decent training program. We do ours weekly. We do a less than 5-minute video on a weekly basis. And people will actually be talking about the training in the break room, in the kitchen. It just goes a long way to increasing the acceptance and understanding of everybody as to what is expected and how to do it. And then obviously investment. It takes money to do this stuff. It takes time to do this stuff, to do it right. Some pieces take more money, some take less, some take more time, some take less. The changes, again, affect workflow, they affect existing process, and just being aware of that you don't just flip a switch and say, we're doing this. There's planning that goes into it. You need to engage staff members and team members that operate in those environments and get their input. Their buy-in to these programs goes a long way to its acceptance and its success. Otherwise, people just start working around what you put in place because they don't truly think it's important. And we can't let that happen. So these are some of the key pieces to a good cybersecurity program.
Absolutely. And we've got a couple of comments from the chat that I want to bring to you.
Sure.
Yuta Bang says that she would make the point that while we are talking about cybersecurity compliance, it is the business best interest to be protected and keep their operations safe, just like OSHA is a compliance issue, but keeps us all safe.
Absolutely. And it's funny because as you go through the process of evaluating your risks and looking at the security options available to you, you start taking into account other things. You start looking at personnel safety. You start looking at property protections. I mean, it just opens your eyes to a lot of different things. So yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, great. And then we've got Adam has said a question. He's asked, are most of the OT attacks come from the IT enterprise side?
That's typically how they're occurring now. They're coming in through that side and traversing to the OT side. That's one of the reasons segmentation is so important and isolating those things. And the other OT attack method is going to be from an inside attack, whether it's inadvertent or inadvertent. People make mistakes, but they still get classified as a cyber incident. But yeah, they're primarily right now they're coming from the IT side.
Okay. Thank you. He's got a follow-up question that says a lot of our customers we talk to about cybersecurity say our IT handles our security without understanding OT and how different it is from IT. How do you overcome this issue with engineering on the plant floor needs to handle the OT and work with IT to completely protect the facility?
I'm going to go back to this slide. You handle it through policy and procedure and training. And it has, so in a lot of organizations, historically, security has come from the IT department. In most cases, hey, we're going to implement security. We're going to do this. To have an effective program that people understand has consequences if you don't follow it, that security program needs to come from the top. You need to have executive ownership and sponsorship of your security initiatives, as well as your compliance initiatives. And with that will come adherence by staff. If it doesn't, there are penalties. And that's the key to it. It has to be enforced at some point, and the only people that can truly do that enforcement are going to be, CEO, president, owner. That's the way it has to be. They're judge and jury sometimes.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that strict compliance is required for. We also have a question that says, what is a reasonable percent of overall budget for a small to medium-sized company to invest in cyber hygiene?
That's a moving number. Some of the things that dictate it are, what are we protecting? You know, the value of what we're protecting is going to determine how much we need to spend. If it's hard to say. You know, it's going to cost me a whole bunch more to protect a vault of gold than it is to protect the source code to a software application I'm developing. So it would be, you know, commensurate with that. Basic, just general cyber hygiene. You know, you should be, and not just cyber hygiene, but your IT spend in general. I mean, numbers of 15 to 20% are pretty common. But again, it depends on so many variables in your situation. You know, but looking at the IT needs as well as the security needs related to the IT, 15 to 20% is not uncommon.
Okay, thank you. You just got a follow up. She says, take your reporting and self-assessment seriously. It is okay to start with a low score and improve, but don't embellish what you're doing. Like Jay said, this is serious.
I had to get a sip of coffee there real quick. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. What Una said right there is 100% accurate. In the work we do with customers on doing the assessment, it's about identifying the risks. What don't you have? What are we protecting? Because if you don't identify that correctly, if you gloss over it because you want to change your score, well, we have, I can't even think of an example at the second, but you say, well, you talk yourself into it. Well, we have this and it's close enough to meeting that. I'm going to say yes. You're doing yourself a terrible disservice. You're not properly identifying your needs, and thereby you're not properly addressing your needs. So yes, a self-assessment is an ideal tool to be truly honest. It might set you back a little bit and go, wow, man, I didn't realize we were not doing as well as we thought. But that's the whole point of it. Get yourself a good baseline. What do you really have in the environment? And move forward with solid plans to make a change.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that's it for now.
Good. Just a couple things on, you know, what is sensitive data. We talk about protecting information. You know, different types of sensitive data depends on the industry you're in, the type of work you're doing. Just, you know, a couple little ideas there. Then we have protected information, which is a little different. You can have sensitive information that is not protected. Protected is, you know, covered under these compliance requirements, regulations, or laws, and so on. PII, huge push to protect privacy information. From the state and local side of things than from the federal government. But and insurance is killing us with it. So it's just a big push to make sure that's protected. PHI, of course, everybody's heard of HIPAA to some degree or another. Can't go to a doctor's office without filling in your little disclaimers. That's still out there. PCI is a private requirement managed by the payment card industry. The Visa, MasterCard, and so on, they all participate, but it's still a requirement just the same that vendors that want to work with the credit card payments have to adhere to. And then we have CUI data for those in the DoD side of things. These are information that has to be protected, which means you have to demonstrate real controls and real evidence around how you're protecting this information. And it gets very detailed. General, you know, talking about security practices, it just needs to be built into the way you work. It can't be special. It can't be an add-on to something. It needs to be part of the processes. If it's not, people are going to find a way to get around it. You know, there can't be a way to get around it. And if there is, people need to understand, well, this is why we're doing it this way. This is what it means. And if you don't, this is what's going to happen to you. But the more you just integrate security practices into what you do on a daily basis, the more it becomes natural, the more it impacts your culture, that everybody understands this is what we do. And it just becomes a way of life in that organization. I mean, we in our business, that's all we do. You know, so everything we look at with that skeptical eye of, well, where'd that come from? What is that? You know, those types of things. So, you know, making sure you have it up in the way you do things, in a normal practice of things, will go a long way to certainly achieving it. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. Recently, we call them business email compromise. They've been really within the last year to 18 months, have been just killers. I mean, they're just destroying confidence. They're destroying the integrity of data. They're using them to, once they got access to a compromised account, they're using it to gain access to others. And it just becomes a snowball effect. We have had, out of the last 7 weeks, we have had 6 of those weeks occupied by mitigating an email compromise event. Most of them have been through Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, because the victim in this case, and in all cases that we've dealt with over the last 7 weeks, was the user of the organization was a victim of a phishing email. Got an email, thought it was something they needed to do, clicked the link, went to a website with a fake login page for something that was relevant to them. The Microsoft guys got a fake Microsoft login page for Microsoft 365. I forget what the Google Workspace account got. I think it was a Google Calendar login or something silly. And they log in with their credentials, and then they're presented with a incorrect username or password. Well, it's not even a real site. Somebody just got your credentials to your service, and now they know what it is. Once they have those credentials, they react. Typically, within what we've seen is within minutes. They get those credentials, they're logged into that person's account. They are doing a variety of things, either forwarding emails. They'll set up a forwarder on that mailbox so that they're getting all the email that user gets. They're deleting emails. They're recursing through contact information. So who else can I get? They're sending additional phishing emails to those contacts. They can overwhelm the mail server by flooding it with activity, whether sending messages, receiving messages, or both. So there's just a lot of things that they can do just by getting access to your email account. And this is becoming more and more common. And on the Microsoft 365, I want to talk about the risks of this for a second. I know we're getting closer on time here. But and the Microsoft 365 or even the Google Workspace environment, that access isn't just to your email. It's to SharePoint files, OneDrive files, other cloud applications you have within that ecosystem, other data you have. And depending on that user's rights that they got the credentials for, I mean, all hell could break loose. They can delete things, they can reconfigure things. And what we've seen is in probably about half of the cases, the attacker actually went in and started changing configurations within these services, adding transport rules on the email server so that now not only email that comes to that user, but any email that comes to that organization is now being duplicated and sent somewhere else. I mean, you think about what's in the emails you transfer daily, the type of information and how much some of it could be so sensitive. And somebody now is just getting a free read at it. It's scary. The one biggest thing you can do to prevent this type of attack is have multi-factor authentication turned on. It'll, even if you fall victim to the phishing email and go and enter your credentials in a fake credential grabbing site, they still don't have your MFA. They can't get past that without your device or your biometrics or whatever the case may be, something you have, right? Or something you are. So implement multi-factor authentication wherever you can, as fast as you can, and that will go a long way to protecting you. I mentioned the cyber insurance a minute ago. Cyber insurance, the cyber liability insurance If you don't have MFA enabled on your remote access to email, they won't insure you. It's just not going to happen. So it starts there. So make sure you've got the stuff going. Real quick, protecting the perimeter is important for those of us that have an infrastructure. We have our own servers on premise. We have our own data that we're working, our own knowledge workforce that's here doing things. It's becoming less significant as we shift to the cloud, and we're moving a lot of services to the cloud. But you still need to protect both of them. So quickly, I just wanted to address, what do we need to do to protect our local network? I'm calling it the perimeter. So at the edge where the internet meets your network, how are we going to protect the network from unwanted internet traffic and internet activity? The first thing you have to do is have a current technology-based firewall. 2 years ago, they started referring to them as next generation firewalls. I believe they're still called that today. Future generation, I couldn't tell you exactly. But any firewall produced within the last 3 to 5 years is going to have the technology we need to implement these security controls. You may need a business class 1 versus a residential type of unit, but make sure it's a commercial device. But start with really granular rules around what traffic is allowed to and from. The old way of setting up a firewall, and never appropriate, but it was done anyway, was we'll allow all traffic going from here to there, no restrictions. Well, that can't be the case anymore. It has to be full of restrictions. We'll allow traffic going from point A to point B. We'll allow it during 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We'll allow it over HTTPS protocol, over port 443, and all that traffic is going to be inspected by our UTM engines in the firewall to make sure there's no malicious payload. I mean, that's to the extent that should be. So that's a big concern. That'll eliminate a lot of your immediate threat from the internet, is by having a good rule set in that firewall. And then using the security features of that device to inspect the traffic, detect if there's something going on, and even prevent things from happening. So automatically prevent access based on what the traffic is doing. Just block it. It shuts it off. Data loss prevention, if a file transfer is occurring and there's conditions around it, but and it falls outside of those conditions that are allowed, it blocks it, prevents it. We don't let it go. Data loss prevention technology also inspects traffic as it's leaving or attempting to leave to determine what's in it, and you can classify things. Well, if it has a social security number, we're not going to allow it to go this way. It's going to have to do something different. So those are key pieces. And another one, and again, this is going to go back to cyber liability insurance. If you access your local network remotely to gain access to services on the network when you're working from home or on the road or whatever the case may be, if that connection is not through an encrypted VPN tunnel, and if it does not have multi-factor authentication on your connection, they're not going to insure you. This is within the last 3 to 6 months. I mean, they're changing it so fast on what their requirements are. The cyber insurance industry lost money last year, and an insurance company will not lose money again, or they won't be in business. So they are putting requirements on companies to have these protections in place before we'll even insure you. So just be aware of that and be prepared for your next cyber liability insurance application. Logging and auditing, I think I had that on the previous slide as well. Oh no, I did not, on email compliments. Logging and you have to capture the data of what's happening in the systems, who's doing it, so that we can review it in the case of an incident and be able to know what's going on. And protecting the cloud, a little different, right? We don't have a firewall device sitting in front of it. I might see a Visio diagram that's got a cloud with a firewall in front of it. That's not the way it works. You have your cloud services, you have software as a service, you name it, it's as a service now, it's available. But there's some basic things that you need to look at and how you can approach securing access to it. One, that system or service should have some rule set that allows or denies connections based on whatever you configure it. Maybe it's restricted by source IP addresses. Maybe it's restricted by connection methods or browser, a certificate installed on the computer. You want to look at those things so that you can identify these systems are allowed to connect, anything else is not. Integration with single sign-on and identity management solutions. That's a huge step to making your life easier, as well as making your security stronger. All authentication being done by one service, whether you're using Google, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, doesn't matter. They tie back to one authentication identity or identity authentication, and all your logging is there. You can set separate controls around there that Jay can connect to this service, but Jay's not allowed to connect to that one based on who I am, not where I am. Very, very, very beneficial to increasing your security posture. Once I'm in the service, I've got logged in, I'm connected, I'm doing what I need to do. You need to have controls within that service that says Jay has permission in SAP to do this, or he can create user accounts, but he cannot modify this data. I might be able to import data, upload documents, but I'm not allowed to download anything. So you want to make sure that the granular rights and permissions within these services are properly configured, and that any privileged access is really scrutinized, and you determine, does this person need the ability to create user accounts? Does this person need the ability to create customer accounts? You need to really think through those things. The days of giving me the key to the car and saying, see ya, those are over. Any access to the cloud services must be done with encrypted communication. That's pretty much a no-brainer at this point, that it should be in any place that you're using. But some companies have their own web services that they built, and you need to take into account that using HTTP as a protocol for accessing web services is you can't do it. It's got to be encrypted. It's got to be verifiable certificates that are used, and then you can use other mechanisms as well. But has to have that encrypted communication. And again, logging and auditing, right? We have to know who's connecting, who's doing what, when are they doing it, where did they come from, all that good info. Well, speaking of logging and auditing, right? We have to know what's going on in our environment. A big part of it is to know or to figure out what happened should something go wrong, right? We need to be able to go back and look at this and say, what do we have? Video cameras are a perfect example of that. The whole point of having video surveillance in your environment is so you can go back and say, all right, well, what happened? Who came in the door? What time was it? What did they do? We see it all. Think of it the same way with logging and auditing. It's just a digital surveillance, right? We don't use it in most cases unless there's a need to. But that logging data can also provide real-time information into what's going on. Is this a normal activity? Is it an abnormal activity? Is it an authorized activity? Is it a risky activity? And we use automated tools. We use log aggregation to pull this stuff and process this in real time to give us a immediate response to threat activity. So without having those security monitoring services to do that, then you're looking at doing these things manually. We're talking quite a bit of data, very difficult to do manually on a recurring basis. So to stay current with what's happening, to be alerted to potential threats is hard. Smaller organizations, it might be doable, but the more you get into integrated systems, more people, more devices, the more that data just balloons to where you have to have some automated processes to deal with it. But without having audit functionality, you can't prove that things have happened or that they haven't happened. You get to, I'll go with cyber insurance again, because it's very common these days. They want to see evidence of a wide variety of things. And almost all the evidence they're asking for, you can get out of your logging information. On CMMC, on HIPAA, on PCI, those compliance requirements, they actually dictate that you have to have logging of these activities, that they have to be reviewed, that they have to be analyzed, and events that would trigger a security alert for immediate action. So they're part of the security system itself, not just a nice to have type of thing. Without knowing that information, you just have no intelligence to go back and make any improvement, to make a change without knowing what the impact is. It's the historical data of what's actually done in your environment. And without that information, you're at a severe loss. A couple of trends that are occurring in the industry right now, I wanted to bring to your attention. Supply chain risk management is coming as a requirement from all directions. That means your vendors, your third-party suppliers, providers, whatever they may be, contractors, are obligated to meet the same security requirements you are, or the requirements that you tell them they need to meet. And you need to start telling them, because you're going to be getting told. I'm sure a lot of you have had dealings with either a contractor that you're providing services for, where they've said, hey, we need you to fill this out, and you're getting this questionnaire and you're attesting to all these things that yes, we're doing it. Well, it's incumbent on all of us to do that with any of our business partners. And you can customize it to what your needs are, but we need to make sure that we're holding them accountable for participating in the protection of systems and information. I mentioned cyber liability insurance several times. It's really going to drive a lot of things in the compliance industry, because it's such a core component to our businesses. Without meeting their requirements, it's going to be too impactful to business to not meet their requirements. So as they push more stringent standards on us, it will make it much easier for us to achieve other requirements like CMMC or HIPAA or so on, because we have to do the cyber liability. You just can't. You can't not do it. I mean, and it's going to drive your mindset, your practices to make achieving other compliance requirements much, much easier, because you'll have a baseline, you'll have an infrastructure in place, you'll have a mindset in place, you'll have executive sponsorship, because this cyber liability insurance, your CEO is all over that. They own that like white on rice. And if that's driving this, you'll have their sponsorship and support and driving all the other requirements as well. Increased state and local laws around privacy protection. California, New York, two big ones. All the states have introduced some sort of legislation around data privacy protection, more significantly around reporting breaches of that privacy protection. So every state now has reporting requirements around who do you report to, under what conditions do you have to report a data breach, and those are ever changing as well. Having some cyber liability insurance will provide you some guidance in that if it comes to actually an incident that you're reporting. Good legal help will provide that for you as well. And again, your incident response plans will have already identified what your specific reporting requirements are. They will be documented in your plan. You'll have your contact information in your plan, so that if the time comes, you're not spending 2 and 3 days trying to find this information out. You go to your incident response plan. It's right there on the page labeled reporting instructions. So I can't stress that enough. Multi-factor, multi-factor, multi-factor. It's here 3 times. It must be important, right? Anything you have that will support multi-factor access, that it makes sense to do, and that's, I don't want to say every single thing, but anything that's especially external or privileged or administrative accounts, you want to have multi-factor access or a multi-factor authentication for. There's multiple services and solutions for it. It's not terribly expensive, and it's usually very easy to implement. I recommend you put it in place as many places as possible, as quickly as possible. Data retention and deletion. Where I'm seeing this is in service agreements. You're working with another business, they're providing a certain service for you. You're giving them information that they're processing and then giving you back a product. Requirements for them to retain the data you give them or delete the data you give them need to be in the agreements. This again, I'm seeing as a function of the cyber liability insurance questionnaires and other vendor agreements. But they want to have assurance that you have a retention policy for their data that they're giving you, and that you can delete and show them evidence that you've deleted their data upon their request or upon the end of the retention cycle. So seeing that a lot within just the last few months kind of caught me by surprise. I didn't know where it came from, but it certainly rose to the top quickly. And then a couple of key words you might hear about: zero trust and identity management. They kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're complementing services. Zero trust is the concept of I don't trust anything. Every time you access something, you have to verify who you are, where you're coming, whatever the case may be, that you are who you say you are. And that's, again, service-based. There's a lot of products that offer that functionality. It integrates or is part of identity management in many cases. Identity is, I'm Jay Sundberg, nice to meet you. I need to prove that I'm Jay Sundberg before I can use my username and password to go log into something. So that's a very, it's becoming a more and more common method of feeding the single sign-on solutions, the integration solutions, because once I prove who I am, my username and password doesn't matter. I've already proven I am who I am, and usernames and passwords start to go by the wayside. But that zero trust on top of it says every time I go to access something, I have to prove that I am Jay Sundberg. And by accomplishing that, you eliminate a great deal of potential risk. So it's a newer methodology. It's gaining very fast momentum. People are implementing it in a lot of places because it's very good. It works. So I think as we were going through that, I talked about some things you can do to implement some of these measures now. We addressed some during some of the comments earlier. One thing in particular that I don't think we got onto was backups. Being able to back up your data, know that your backups work, be able to recover your systems in the time frame that you need to. Establishing a very strong backup and recovery plan, as well as the DR plan, is something that really you need to look at that and address it in a manner that suits your business. But too many times people say, I have a backup. Yeah, when does it back up? I don't know. It just backs up. Well, when's the last time you checked it? We never had to check it. Well, did you ever use it? Well, yeah, we had to use backup about 2 years ago. Well, it worked then, so it must be working now, right? That's not the case. One of the very simplest things you can do to improve your security posture. It doesn't secure your environment, but allows you to recover from a problem. And having that and the ability to do it quickly can save you money and can mean the difference of your business staying in business or not. So, key element there. I know I mentioned some resources available. I'm going a little long. I don't want to keep you, but CISA.gov, www.cisa.gov, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Ton of resources on the site. This is the one I subscribe to for the different security alerts and vulnerability announcements. It's a source for training. It's a source. There's some assessment guidance and assessment tools. Just a ton of different information. They have just general business information. They have specific industry guidance. Really valuable resource, lots of different areas to explore and subscribe to. Community, good community involvement, and it's very current and very relevant. Works with a lot of independent private agencies, and it's just a great resource for information to get you started on your journey, wherever it may take you, and will lead you to specific vendors, specific solutions, and much more information. But a great place to start for sure. My other favorite is the NIST website, www.nist.gov. This provides more specific security guidance in the form of the NIST special publications, the risk management framework, privacy frameworks, a bunch of different frameworks, specific guidance around what some of the controls are, methods of implementing them, methods of assessment. How can you actually self-assess your environment effectively? The vulnerabilities database. So we might get an announcement there's an application vulnerability in VMware. I can go to the NIST vulnerabilities database and look it up and find out what where the specifics. It'll take me links back to VMware to tell me which versions, all that good stuff. But it's a good source to begin with. I wanted to say one other thing about vulnerabilities. If you don't know what you have in your environment, you don't know what's vulnerable. How can you address it? How can you mitigate that risk? You have to have a solid inventory of what's in your environment, device-wise, software-wise, people-wise, assets, because when these vulnerabilities are announced and disclosed, you need to be able to look at that and say, this affects item ABC. Let me go look up in my inventory, item ABC. Oh crap, I've got 4 of those. We better go figure out what we need to do. If you don't have that information at your hand, you're just waiting for it to be exploited to find out. And then by then it's too late. So some good info there. And with that, I will rescind control of the microphone and camera. And Felicia, I don't know if there were any other questions or comments I can answer. I do know we're out of time.
We are. There are just a couple of comments. One of them was from Yuta. She just wanted to say that, having cybersecurity insurance will not relieve you from being cyber compliant. And I think you went over that pretty well. And then Misty just asked in general, do you think the average IT department is aware of the and do they use the resources? So I think that's gonna depend on the size, right?
It would, but at the average IT department, security and compliance is becoming its own animal and its own specialty. So IT works hand in hand with security, and IT deals with a lot of the network security. But I'm seeing more and more organizations have a dedicated resource for security. And that resource, whether it's contracted or internal or whatever, is helping guide that. And and then they're raising the awareness with IT that, hey, go check this stuff out. Here's, or I'm sending them the notifications I get from NIST or from CISA and saying, hey, follow up on this and see what's going on. So there is an increased awareness, but I think it's coming from an outside influence to IT.
Thank you, Jay. That was some really great information. Super exciting. It's a whole nother world out there in the cyber world. So it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary, but we definitely appreciate your time today, Jay. Thank you for being with us and sharing the information, and just look forward to continuing to work with you as we help these companies across the state.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was an honor to participate. I love working with you guys, and anything we can do to assist and further the cause, pick up my phone and give me a call.
Hey, that sounds good. Thanks again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.